Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot into the frozen dirt floor of a medieval peasant's home. There's frost on the inside of the walls, the fire's gone out, and something with feathers is definitely roosting near your feet. You're waking up in 14th century England, not in a castle, but on a straw-stuffed mattress beside a snoring cow and a pile of last night's ash. The air tastes of damp wool and wood smoke. You sit up, trying not to disturb the hen sleeping under the bench. Your back cracks in 5 places. Somewhere under your tunic, a flea is having the time of its life. You reach for breakfast, if that word still applies to a fist-sized chunk of barley bread so hard you could chip a tooth. You tear off a piece and dip it into a wooden cup of sour buttermilk, swishing it around like a sommelier pretending not to miss real food. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, leave a comment with your location and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You press your hand to the heavy wooden door, and it groans open. A rush of cold air steals the little warmth from your fingers. The cow lowly moos behind you, sounding vaguely disappointed. It's not that she expects you to bring her breakfast. It's just that she knows you're too broke to provide it. You step outside into the winter dawn. The sky is a gray smear over the village, the kind of morning that looks like someone tried to start the day but gave up halfway through. Frost coats the ground like sugar, but without any of the joy. You take a deep breath and feel your lungs ache. Before the sun properly rises, there are chores to do. You swing past the latrine bucket. It's full again, and chuck the contents into the stream just beyond the hedge. Later, you'll collect water from that same stream for cooking. Yes, you try not to think about it too much. Inside, your wife stokes the hearth with the last splinters of yesterday's firewood. The youngest child curls beside the cow, who, despite smelling like wet hay, keeps the little one warmer than any blanket could. There's no fire yet, but the embers blink sleepily, promising warmth if you're patient. Breakfast for the family is, well, more of the same. Chunks of rough bread, hardened cheese if there's any left, and maybe a scrap of bacon fat saved from last week, rubbed onto the crust to trick your tongue into thinking it's richer than it is. Your stomach growls in protest. But honestly, it's used to this. Hunger is less a sharp pain now, more a familiar hum, like background music, always there. And speaking of hums, the cow has begun to softly chew cud beside the hearth, her jaw working rhythmically, like she's mocking how little you have to chew. While your wife rubs dried rosemary into a pot to prep for dinner, you're hoping for a thin vegetable pottage if there's anything to forage later. You check the ceiling for signs of the mouse that stole a bit of bread 2 nights ago. He's clever, that one. Might name him soon. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants kept pests like that around on purpose, to clean crumbs, or simply had no choice. You lace up your worn boots, each with a hole exactly where your big toe lives. They're stiff with dried mud and sadness. The pig snorts in its corner pen, reminding you it still needs slop. That pig, by the way, is dinner. Not today, but eventually. You remind yourself not to get emotionally attached, even though your daughter already named it Sir Oinks-a-Lot. Outside again, your breath curls visibly as you trudge toward the field. The frost crunches under your feet. You stretch your back and glance at the sky, wondering how many more days until planting season. Your stomach growls again, and you start the day as peasants always do, with cold hands, aching joints, a too thin breakfast, and the knowledge that no one's coming to help. You trudge through the frozen lane that cuts between the cottages, your breath clouding in front of you like a ghost that wants out. The handle of your hoe bites cold into your palm, and you wonder, as you do most mornings, why the Lord's field seems to get bigger every year. You pass the tithe barn, that hulking wooden beast where 1/10 of everything you grow ends up, no questions asked. You remember how last harvest, you handed over a bag of barley seed, so light it practically floated, and watched it get swallowed into a mountain of grain the rats would enjoy more than the church ever would. No one says anything, but everyone knows. You're feeding God's mice. The frost hasn't lifted from the ground, so the soil is stubborn today. Every strike of the hoe sends a small jolt up your arms. Your hands are cracked, dirt wedged so deep under your nails it might be permanent. You pause after the first hour, not to rest, heaven forbid, but to sip some small ale from a leather flask hanging off your hip. It tastes earthy and slightly sour, like beer left behind at a bad party. Still, it's safer than the river. You've seen what goes into the river. Your neighbor, Edric, works the next row, shoulders hunched, humming a flat tune. "Nice day for it," he mutters, without looking up. You both know it's a lie, but lies make better company than silence. Suddenly, the plow horse stumbles a little. You tighten the harness, and it lets out a long sigh. Like it, too, is considering a career change. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants viewed their animals as property, co-workers, or adopted family members. Standing here now, knee-deep in mud beside a horse you've fed more often than yourself this month, the answer seems obvious. By mid-morning, your back is hot with sweat, even though your breath still fogs. The fields stretch endlessly in every direction. Your own plot, small, hopeful, hungry, sits just beyond the edge of the Lord's land, waiting for your attention you can't yet spare. You hear church bells in the distance, not a call to prayer, just a reminder. The church is watching, and your tithe is due. You're already doing unpaid labor for the priest's barley field next week. You try not to think about it, or about how, during Lent, you'll be expected to work just as hard with even less food in your belly. Lunch isn't for hours, but your body keeps asking. To distract yourself, you imagine the feast you'll never have. Roast lamb with honey glaze, a wheel of soft cheese, a trencher of white bread so fresh it still sighs when sliced, and maybe, just maybe, a boiled egg. But let's not get crazy. A robin hops across a fence post. For a moment, the world softens. The morning sun finally slips through the clouds, brushing the field in pale gold. You glance toward the woods and think of the herbs your wife might gather there later. Rosemary, thyme, maybe even garlic if the frost hasn't bitten too deep. You return to the row you're working. The hoe meets earth again with a dull thunk. You try to keep a rhythm. Thunk, breathe, thunk, curse, thunk. Dream of cheese. As the day draws on, your feet go from cold to numb to something in between. You chew on a bit of straw to keep your mouth busy. Not nutritious, not satisfying, just distracting. By the time noon approaches, your stomach is performing its own Gregorian chant. You think about what might be in your lunch sack. Hopefully more than just crumbs. Hopefully not lentils. Not after last time. Let's just say the nightmares were oddly specific. You rub the back of your neck and look out over the frost-softened hills. The wind is picking up. Somewhere, a pig squeals. Somewhere, a child cries. Somewhere, a loaf of white bread is being buttered in a nobleman's hall, and someone complains that the crust is too crisp. You smile to yourself. You've never had that problem. You sit on the edge of a broken fence, your back against a low stone wall that's been there longer than the village. The sun has crawled a little higher now, warming the tips of your ears, but not enough to chase the ache from your fingers. At least it's lunch, or the medieval approximation of lunch. Your wife unties a cloth bundle and reveals its modest treasure, a palm-sized hunk of barley bread, dry but passable, a wedge of milk cheese that's aged just enough to bite back, and, miracle of miracles, a wilted leek wrapped in cabbage leaf. The children cheer quietly, which mostly sounds like grunts. You break the bread and offer a piece to your youngest, who immediately drops it in the dirt. No one reacts. A quick brush, and it's good as new. Clean enough. If bread were a status symbol, and let's be honest, it absolutely is, you'd all be wearing burlap. The browner the bread, the poorer the baker, and your loaf is practically a coal brick. Meanwhile, in the manor house, someone's cutting into wastall, a fluffy, pale white bread that looks more like cake and costs more than your entire pig. Still, the cheese has flavor, and the leek is fresher than anything you've seen in weeks. You dip the bread into a little dish of lard mixed with crushed rosemary. A trick, really, to convince the tongue it's been fed. You chew slowly, letting the flavor stretch across the bite like a song that almost, but not quite, brings tears. Your eldest son unwraps a piece of dried apple from the foraging trip last week and offers a sliver to his sister. She sniffs it, declares it too chewy, and feeds it to the chicken perched beside her. The chicken looks smug. You're fairly certain she laid an egg last month and is still bragging about it. You tell a story between bites about that one summer long ago when a neighbor tried to impress his in-laws by making lentil stew. Didn't soak 'em. Whole village got the belly demons. The kids laugh. Your wife raises an eyebrow. It's an old joke, but it lands. You lean back and let your gaze wander across the fields. Just past the hedgerow is the edge of the forest, where wild garlic and violets hide under the fallen leaves. If the weather holds, you might forage there later. Your wife is already mentally sorting what might go into tonight's pottage. The children are negotiating over who gets the last bite of cheese like it's a treaty negotiation. The pig snorts once, as if to vote. Historians still argue whether peasants had fixed meal times or simply ate whenever possible, judging by the squabble currently unfolding over a half-inch cube of old cheese. You're leaning toward the latter. Lunch ends too soon. The children lick their fingers, and your wife carefully folds the empty cloth napkin with the kind of reverence usually reserved for relics. You rise slowly, back creaking like the door to the tithe barn. The warmth from the bread lingers in your belly. Not enough to call it full, but enough to say, for now, you'll make it. You glance over at your son, who's licking the inside of the lard bowl with the precision of a monk illuminating a manuscript. "Leave some for the saints, will you?" you mutter. He grins and hands it back. Just then, your neighbor's voice drifts over the fence. "Hey, want to trade a turnip for a handful of oats?" You nod, already reaching for the little pouch at your belt. It's less of a trade economy and more of a collective act of culinary desperation. But hey, it keeps things interesting. Before you return to the fields, you take one last moment to stretch your arms and feel the brief, blessed comfort of being fed. Your daughter picks up a crust and tucks it into her pocket for later. You don't ask how much later. In this life, crumbs have their own kind of currency. The hoe waits for you, leaning against a rock like it knows the joke already. You sigh, pat the dust from your knees, and get up. Lunch is over. The hunger, not quite. You're back in the fields, mud creeping up your ankles, and your hoe swinging like a pendulum of obligation. But something is different now. There's a spring in your son's step, a spark in his grin, because today is the day. Today, he joins the ranks of grown folk in the most peasanty rite of passage known to mankind. His first sip of ale. He holds the leather flask like it contains treasure, or poison, or both. You try not to laugh as he gives it a hesitant sniff, wrinkles his nose, and takes the tiniest sip possible without technically backing out. He swallows, coughs once, then gives you a look that says, "I regret every decision that led to this moment." "Congratulations," you say solemnly. "You're a man now." He grimaces. Men have terrible taste. Fair enough. In truth, small ale isn't exactly delicious. It's watered down, slightly sour, and cloudy enough to hide a frog, but it's also safer than the water in the river, which you just saw someone use as both latrine and laundry. So ale it is. Even for the kids. Especially for the kids. Historians still argue whether medieval children were actually drunk all the time, or just mildly buzzed and perpetually tired. You suspect the latter. Either way, no one complains when the ale replaces the parasite-riddled well water. As you and your son work side by side, he asks questions, endless, rapid-fire, ale-fueled questions. Do pigs dream? If the cow farts near the fire, will it explode? Why can't we eat eggs today? That last one stings a little. You explain it's a fast day. The church says no meat, no eggs, no milk. You could almost believe it's for spiritual discipline, if the priest weren't getting fat off your barley. The boy nods slowly. So we're holy and hungry. That's about right, you say. You wipe sweat from your brow with a sleeve that's mostly holes and dust. The sun's angle tells you it's late afternoon. Your stomach agrees, loudly. Time to head back. You collect your tools, pack the remaining turnips, and give the plow horse a pat on the flank. On the walk home, your son skips ahead, pointing out mushrooms that might or might not kill you. "We should ask Mum before eating them," he says wisely. "Or just let the chicken try it first," you reply. Back at home, the cottage smells of rosemary and boiled onion. Your wife has started the pottage. Tonight's big event. It's still mostly water with attitude, but she's tossed in the last of the carrots and a scrap of cured pork that's been hanging above the fire since early winter. You swear you can smell joy rising with the steam. Your daughter sets the table, or rather, wipes off the one board you all eat on. She hums a tune that sounds suspiciously like the death wail of the neighbor's goat, but no one mentions it. The pig in the corner eyes the bubbling pot with professional interest. There's something special in the air tonight, not because the food is better. It isn't. But because you're all together, and for once, no one is actively starving, injured, or being accused of heresy. Your son, still puffed up from his ale initiation, declares he's going to catch a rabbit tomorrow. With what? You ask. He proudly holds up a bent stick. Perfect, you say. They'll die laughing. He nods seriously. That's the plan. You all settle in near the fire, waiting for the pottage to soften the turnips into something chewable. The cow shifts in her stall. The chicken lays an egg with a surprised squawk. Everyone cheers. Even the pig looks impressed. Your son raises his tin cup of small ale, to warm food and not dying. You clink yours against his with mock solemnity, a noble toast. The light dims, the stew thickens, the house fills with the scent of herbs, steam, and quiet pride. It may not be much, but it's enough. Later, with bellies only slightly less hollow than before, you set out into the woods with your wife and daughter. The air is sharp and clear, filled with the scent of pine, damp leaves, and something faintly hopeful. It's foraging time, not just a chore, but a quiet, shared ritual. If you're lucky, the forest might give you enough to flavor tomorrow's pottage into something bordering on flavorful. You carry a worn basket. Your wife carries a knife, small and sharp, its handle polished smooth from years of use. Your daughter naturally carries opinions. "That's not parsley," she declares, pointing at a patch of moss. "That's moss." "You're doing great," you say. She grins and keeps looking. Among the underbrush, you find a few promising patches, some tired-looking wild leeks, a lone apple-headed cabbage, and, joy of joys, a clutch of violets. Not that anyone plans on eating flowers, but it's nice to know something still bothers to bloom in the middle of all this dampness and mud. You kneel to pull up a particularly defiant parsnip, fingers sinking into the wet earth. The cold bites, but the scent of turned soil rises like something ancient and trustworthy. It smells like memory. Your wife holds up a mushroom and squints at it. Edible or death? Probably both, you say. She pockets it anyway. Historians still argue whether peasants were truly skilled in identifying edible wild plants, or just incredibly lucky most of the time. Judging by how often you've watched your cousin Wilfred try to cook dandelion roots and end up hallucinating church bells, you're leaning toward the latter. Still, there's a rhythm to this. The quiet brushing of leaves, the occasional bird call, your daughter announcing every single bug she encounters like it's royalty. A beetle. Another beetle. This one is shinier. You find a small quince, frostbitten and battered, but still good enough to simmer into a sticky marmalade, if boiled long enough and coaxed with honey. "Mum can use this to sweeten the stew," your daughter says, tucking it gently into the basket like it's a baby bird. There's also talk of nuts, chestnuts mostly. If the squirrels haven't beaten you to them, in truth, they're more bark than bite this late in the season. But if you roast them long enough and squint while chewing, you might mistake them for food. As the sun dips lower, a thin drizzle begins to fall, not enough to soak you, just enough to be annoying. You pull your hood tighter, your wife shakes off her sleeves, and your daughter tries to catch raindrops on her tongue. You begin the walk back, heavier by only a few ounces, but somehow lighter in spirit. The forest has given what it could. Tomorrow's pottage will have real flavor. Well, real might be a strong word, but something close. As you approach the village, you pass the manor house garden, where rows of greens sit behind iron gates. Someone inside is probably slicing fresh pears for their supper, pairing it with honey and cinnamon, and complaining that the apples are too soft. You resist the urge to hurl a turnip at the fence. Back home, your son is stirring the pottage like he's mixing a potion. The smell is already better, thanks to the herbs your wife added before leaving. Parsley, sage, maybe thyme. No rosemary yet, but it's winter. You'll make do. You hand over the basket. Your wife gives it a quick scan, lifts one eyebrow, and mutters, "Not bad for half a day's wandering." Your daughter proudly presents the quince. "For flavor," she announces, "and because we're out of joy." The pig snorts appreciatively. You're not sure if it's agreeing or just trying to inhale the soup. Either way, it's nice to be seen. You settle near the fire once more. The drizzle patters gently on the thatch above, a sound that matches the slow, steady bubbling from the pot. Steam curls into the air, wrapping itself around the room like a wool shawl. No meat tonight, but with a bit of wild garlic and parsnip, it'll be enough. Not fancy, not feast, but enough. Back inside, the cottage is a small kingdom of warmth and smell. The fire has found its courage again, crackling confidently under the cauldron that swings gently over the embers. The pottage is nearly done, thin, brownish, but fragrant with rosemary and the ghost of pork fat. You could weep from the scent alone, and honestly, you've done so before. Your wife stands over the pot like a general preparing for war. "It's ready," she announces with all the solemnity of a bishop declaring a miracle. Everyone gathers, children, chickens, one particularly nosy cat from next door, and you all take your places around the makeshift table, a wide board balanced on 2 barrels. It wobbles slightly, but so do you after a long day. Bowls are handed out, each slightly chipped in its own way. Your daughter grabs the one with a crack shaped like a rabbit, calls it lucky, and stirs her stew with exaggerated flair. The spoon is wooden, old, and a little scorched, but it still does its job. Your wife ladles out careful portions. No one speaks as the soup is served. It's the kind of reverent silence you usually only hear in churches or during thunderstorms. The pig watches with interest. The cow shifts in the corner, sighs, and lowers her head, clearly offended she wasn't invited. You bring the spoon to your lips. It's hot, hearty, and thanks to today's forage, actually has layers. A bite of turnip here, a kiss of leek there, and the quince melted into something tart and sweet and alchemical. You let out a hum of contentment. Not a moan, those are for lords with gravy, but a quiet hum, deep and satisfied. You tear a piece of barley bread from the loaf that's been warming by the hearth. It's dark, dense, and so dry you could shingle a roof with it, but dipped into pottage, it softens just enough to chew. One of the children tries to scoop stew with the bread, fails, and decides to just eat both simultaneously. Efficient. The candle sputters on the windowsill, casting dancing shadows across the low beams. Someone farts. The chicken startles. You all pretend not to notice. Medieval manners, you see. Historians still argue whether trenchers, those edible bread plates used by the nobility, were actually eaten or given to the poor afterward. Sitting here now, you wonder if they were really just a fancy way of not doing dishes. You'd try it yourself, but your bread's more brick than bowl. After the second spoonful, your son announces, "Best pottage ever." You raise a brow. "Said that last night." "Last night didn't have quince," he says, as though that settles the matter. Your wife smiles. Not wide, not flashy, just a soft curve at the corner of her mouth. For a moment, it feels like feasting. Not the kind with peacocks and almond milk, but the kind where no one's hungry, no one's sick, and the pig hasn't knocked over anything expensive. As the bowls empty and bellies begin to hush, your daughter reaches into the crumb bin for tomorrow's breakfast ration, a few heel ends and a suspicious-looking lump of cheese. She tucks them into a cloth pouch and slips them behind the hearthstone. You all pretend not to notice. She's always been the strategic one. The fire dies down a little. Someone stirs the pot lazily, hoping for a second helping, only to find the bottom. It's always disappointing when you realize you've eaten everything, but it's also oddly comforting. A clean pot means a good meal. Your son yawns wide enough to swallow a duck. You pat his head, and he leans against your side. The warmth of the fire, the stew, and the quiet, all of it settles into the bones. Outside, the wind moans low through the thatch, like an old widow whispering forgotten names. You reach up and pull the chunk of cured pork down from its smoky perch above the fire. You slice off a sliver, not much, just a little, and tuck it into a jar with the last of the turnip water. For next week, you say. Everyone nods. It's the peasant version of saving dessert. You sit back and take a deep breath. The stew is gone. The dishes, well, the single pot will wait. For now there's the fire, the steady rhythm of breathing, and the pig in the corner snoring louder than any human. You smile at your wife. She smiles back. It's not plenty, but it's peace. The fire crackles softly now, low and lazy, like it's too full to move. Around it, your family drifts into that slow twilight state, half awake, half remembering. Dinner's warmth still hums inside you. The pottage may have been thin, but it had character, and wild garlic, and exactly one slice of turnip that didn't taste like betrayal. Your son stares at the flickering light on the ceiling beams. "Da," he says, voice barely above a whisper. "Why don't we eat cucumbers like the French?" You blink. That came out of nowhere. "Well," you say, taking a moment, "because some folks say cucumbers cause fevers. And you know how often the French get sick." Your daughter giggles. Like every Tuesday. It's nonsense, of course. But it's the kind of nonsense that survives centuries because it makes people feel better about not affording fresh vegetables. Historians still argue whether medieval food taboos were grounded in practical medicine or just very elaborate ways of avoiding indigestion. You lean back against the rough timber wall and scratch the side of your neck absently. The flea population here is robust. One of them waves at you, possibly in greeting. A chicken rustles in the corner and lays another surprise egg with a squawk loud enough to wake the cow. The cow, offended, snorts back and starts chewing again in passive-aggressive protest. Your wife takes the egg, wraps it in straw, and sets it aside for tomorrow. Blessings come when they feel like it, she mutters. She's right. As the evening drifts onward, the children begin to tell stories, half folklore, half invention. Your daughter claims she saw a ghost near the tithe barn. Your son insists he saw a badger using tools. You don't argue. At this point, you've seen a goat play keep away with your boots, so who's to say? Then comes the tale everyone waits for. The time your cousin tried to sneak a rabbit out of the Lord's warren. You tell it slowly, relishing each beat. How he built a snare from broom twine and wishful thinking. How he actually caught one. And how he nearly fainted when a noble servant spotted him with a bloody sack. He tried to pretend it was a baby. A very furry baby, with long ears. Everyone laughs again. Even the cow lets out a strange moan, as if joining in. You let the sound wash over you. This is what passes for luxury now. Not meat, not money, but moments. A hot meal. A ridiculous story. The warmth of bodies gathered around a fire that only smokes a little when it rains. You scratch at your knee absently and hit a patch of itchy wool. Time to mend that tomorrow. Or next week, or never. Clothes here are more suggestion than structure. Your daughter wraps herself in an old blanket that once belonged to your grandfather. It still smells faintly of smoke and onions, and maybe even comfort. Your wife, seated beside you, begins humming softly, one of those wordless village tunes that seem to come from the floorboards themselves. Your eyes begin to droop. Your muscles, still sore from work, stop arguing. They're too tired to protest anymore. Then, a sound from outside. The latch on the door rattles just slightly. Everyone freezes. You stand slowly, grab the wooden spoon. It's not exactly a weapon, but you're emotionally attached to it, and open the door a crack. A gust of wind pushes in, followed by nothing. Just empty twilight. Mist curling low over the fields. You close it again. No bandits, no wolves. Just winter reminding you that the world out there is wide, cold, and mostly indifferent. You sit back down. The family exhales. Maybe it was the badger, your son says, eyes wide. Maybe it was your cousin, you say, looking for another rabbit. Your wife chuckles. Well, tell him to bring his own herbs this time. The fire pops, the pot sighs, and someone's snoring. You're not sure who. Might be you. Sleep is tiptoeing closer, but there's still one more log on the fire, one more breath to take, one more story to hear. You lean your head back and close your eyes, letting the rhythm of home take over. It's not safety, not in the modern sense, but it's familiar, predictable. And after a day like today, that's more than enough. The fire's glow is now a low pulse of red in the corner, licking gently at the edges of the hearth like it's trying not to disturb anyone. The room has quieted into that special medieval silence, the kind broken only by snoring, animal breath, and the occasional mysterious drip from the rafters. You're not sure where it's dripping from. You've learned not to ask. You shift your weight on the straw-stuffed mattress and stare into the ceiling beams, where two mice are performing what appears to be a clumsy but enthusiastic courtship dance. Romance is alive and well. Your son has drifted to sleep, curled like a cat near the warm bricks of the hearth. Your daughter is pretending to be asleep, but clearly listening in on your and your wife's hushed chat about tomorrow's chores. "We've got one egg," she whispers. "If it's not Sunday, maybe we fry it. Or boil it, you say, or stare at it until it feels guilty." She giggles. The pig, in the corner, lets out a long, satisfied snort and knocks over a broom. It doesn't wake anyone. That pig has knocked over more things than your son's ever built. Still, he's family. Just slightly saltier and more edible. You lean your head against the timber wall and sigh. The smoke from the hearth hangs just enough in the air to blur the outlines of things, like everything is wrapped in gauze. Your eyes sting a little, but you don't mind. It's a gentle kind of discomfort, one you're used to. Your wife begins listing what's left in the pantry, out loud, like a lullaby of scarcity. 2 turnips, 1 wedge of cheese, 3 fistfuls of barley flour, a spoonful of fat, half a sprig of thyme. You nod slowly. The thyme is optimistic. We still have 1 lentil. You pause. Is it behaving? No, it's French. You both chuckle softly. Historians still argue whether peasants laughed often or rarely. But you're pretty sure that if they didn't laugh, they'd scream. And you've seen what happens when someone screams after stepping on a hedgehog in the dark. It's very hard to explain to the priest. A light tap-tap comes from the roof. Rain, maybe. Or a squirrel with insomnia. Either way, you close your eyes for just a moment and instantly hear your neighbor's goat having some sort of identity crisis outside. Should we? No. You both lie still. Then your son mutters in his sleep, "Don't let the bread burn." It's unclear whether he's dreaming about dinner or reliving a childhood trauma, but you quietly resolve not to test fate tomorrow. Your wife shifts under the shared wool blanket and pulls the edge up to your chin. Her hand lingers on your shoulder a moment. Rough fingers, warm touch. That simple act says everything. We're still here. We're still surviving. The fire lets out a low sigh as it eats the last of the log. In the silence that follows, you hear a new sound, your own breath, steady and slower now. The ache in your knees eases slightly. Your thoughts drift to warmer days, ones where wild garlic grows in every ditch and children bring back berries in sticky fists. Days when the cow won't need to sleep indoors, and maybe, just maybe, a day when you won't have to measure dinner in turnips and hope. You look at your family, curled in awkward, overlapping piles like laundry that never got folded. You smile. Outside, the wind starts up again, nudging the shutters with gentle, wintry fingers. Inside, the pot is empty, the belly's mostly full, and the night ready to take you. And with that, you let yourself slip a little further into stillness. The last of the fire has given up now, its glow replaced by the breath of the sleeping cow and the slow rhythm of your family's breathing. The darkness in the cottage is soft, not empty, filled with the familiar creaks of timber and the slow exhale of animals and people alike, tucked into a heap of wool and straw. You're still awake, but barely. One eye half-lidded, one ear tuned to the wind. The kind of wakefulness that only comes when you're too tired to sleep fast. You reach out to pull the blanket a little higher, feel the scratch of woven wool on your wrist, and tug until your daughter murmurs something about turnips and rolls over. You smile in the dark. Tomorrow will bring the same. Chores before sunrise, the cold bite of frost, and the taste of barley that never quite leaves your mouth. But tomorrow also brings a pot to fill, herbs to find, bread to soften, laughter to share. There's not much in this world that feels like plenty, but here, wrapped in warmth, surrounded by the small noises of a life honestly earned, it feels like enough. You hear your wife mumble something, half dream, half prayer. You answer with a hum, not sure what you're agreeing to, but knowing it matters. Somewhere nearby, the pig stirs and sighs deeply. A chicken flutters in its sleep. The cow shuffles once and settles again, the floor creaking beneath her bulk. You remember the pottage pot, still crusted with what little supper had clung to the bottom. You'll soak it tomorrow. Or not. Maybe just scrape it with a stick and call it seasoning. Historians still argue whether peasant meals were nutritious enough to sustain a lifetime of labor. You'd argue you've made it this far, and with any luck, you'll wake again to the smell of ash and onions and the sound of someone, not you, hopefully, chasing a chicken through the ashes. You let out a slow breath, letting your muscles finally untangle. One more stretch, one more twitch of a toe, and you settle into the mattress like a stone into soil. Heavy. Honest. Exactly where it belongs. So now, you lie there, drifting just beneath the surface of sleep. The chill in the air has dulled into comfort, the rough linen tucked around your legs, and the slow warmth of the nearby hearth ember still radiates in memory more than in heat. The sounds around you grow quieter, not because they stop, but because your mind begins to release its hold on them. The cow's breath fades into the hush of wind against the walls. The murmur of straw under your daughter's restless feet becomes part of the rhythm of the night. Your hands are sore, but they're still yours. And in this stillness, this pause before another day of turning earth and boiling roots, you feel something tender bloom, the satisfaction of enough. Not plenty, not luxury, but enough. A day survived, a meal shared, a roof overhead, warmth, familiar breath in the dark. Outside, the wind makes the shutters tremble ever so gently. The pig snores. The chickens settle once more. The rain starts to whisper over the thatch above, soft and slow and regular, like a lullaby from the sky, a hum older than history. And as your breathing deepens and your limbs grow heavier, That hum pulls you inward, downward, toward the warmth waiting behind your eyelids. Whatever tomorrow holds, turnips, taxes, tithe barns, or rain, it can wait. Right now, in this moment, in this room of quiet breaths and shared blankets and soup-tinged dreams, you are home. Sleep well.